Have you ever wondered if the entire world as you see it is an illusion? As if it were all just really like the Matrix? Well, in today's video, I'm going to talk to you about the concept of oneness and how you can quickly shift out of separation, the belief that you are separate from each other in time and space, autonomous beings, and come into a sense of unity with all that is. The reality is that you don't exist as you think you do, and neither do I. And yet here we are, two beings in separate times and spaces, believing that we are independent from each other in time and space. And on one level that's true, and on many other levels it's not true. We're going to explore what that means. And I'm going to share with you different ways to shift back into oneness whenever you fall back into separation. This is essentially the spiritual path: falling into separation, coming into oneness, falling into separation, coming into oneness. My name is Patrick Paul Garlinger. I am a psychic channel, an intuitive guide, and a spiritual author. Years ago, I had a very powerful Kundalini awakening that opened up my psychic faculties. And I started to download books and publish them and began to read people. And that's what I do for a living now. I share the wisdom that I have received and help people to step into their own personal power, into their divine creator consciousness, so that they can live the life that they really desire and that we're meant to live. Years ago, when I was practicing as a lawyer, I got heavily involved in the environmental movement. I still feel very deeply connected to environmentalism, the earth, and protecting our planet. But at the time, I was exploring legal ways of doing things. One of the things that I started to think about was our food system. And so I got heavily involved in organic foods, GMOs, understanding animal welfare, all of that. And one morning I was eating a meal and I began to think about where all of the different components of that meal came. If it was breakfast, it was coffee and soy milk, and if I were having eggs, some sort of toast or bagel or oatmeal, all the pieces that went into it. And I began to think about tracing all of that. Like, one meal, could I follow the path of all of the pieces all the way back to their origin? It was a wonderful thought experiment because it really took me to all the farmers, people growing the food, people harvesting, cultivating, shipping, going to factories and assembling and shipping to the supermarket into my hands. And I thought about how many people were involved in giving me one meal, one of my meals. And the numbers were incredible, right? And there's something very heart-opening, humbling about that experience, because you realize that every day, a single meal, hundreds if not thousands of people contributed to your life. And that's the first definition of oneness. That is interdependence. We are interdependent. We are this wonderful network of people all contributing to each other's lives, in many instances without ever knowing it. What's powerful about it is recognizing that my life depends on all of these people. I cannot cultivate all of my own food. It is impossible. I don't have the land, I don't have the knowledge, I don't have the time. And even though I don't know any of them, I am dependent upon them. And when you start to think about interdependence, you start to recognize how much every aspect of your life really depends on others that you will never meet. Right? Everyone's contributing in their own way to this incredible network. And so we have to recognize that even though I am living in a body separate in time and space from those people, because I don't interact with them, I don't know them, I may never even cross paths with the vast majority of them, we're still connected. I'm still reliant upon them. I'm not truly autonomous, but my life is intertwined with everyone else. And what that means is that I can't really see myself as separate from them in the way that I might, as being completely autonomous. My life is reliant on them. And that's the first definition of oneness, this interconnectedness. What is the next definition of oneness? We're going to get there. We're going to step back and talk about what we really mean by separation. When we talk about separation, we're talking about the way we come to see ourselves as having an independent sense of self, sense of identity. And when we come into the world, we do not have a sense of independence. We start out as a fetus, completely connected with another person, and then we're released into the world. And over time, our senses begin to take in the data, we begin to adjust and begin to see and understand sounds, and we slowly but surely develop a sense of independence with these other things in the world. So we learn time and space, right? That we operate independently from each other, or seemingly, and we can be in different spaces and at different times. And I'm me and you're you, and I'm still me now and you're still you now, and we operate independently from each other. This is the ways in which our consciousness forms from infancy forward. One of the things that we all need when we start out, which follows from interdependence, is that we all need to be fed. Coming back to food. It's the reason I started with food. We all start out with basic material needs. We have to be fed, and guess what? As infants, we are definitely dependent on others. I certainly didn't feed myself, and neither did you. And that interdependence depends on those material needs being met: food, water, clothing, etc. So that's the second definition of oneness, is that when we're separate, we still have material needs that need to be supplied from others. We all need food, we all need water, we all need air, we all need these sort of material things that are essentially part of the earth. Let me tell you a story. There was one time many years ago that I had spent a week in sort of deep spiritual work, a lot of meditation, a lot of energy work. And on my way back, I was on a train, and I was staring out the window. And there was this moment when suddenly there was no separation between me, the landscape, the train, everything. No sense of myself in time and space, no thought. This blissful moment where I really was. The flowers, the sunlight, everything that was passing by. It's a very brief moment. I experienced it relative to time, my normal sense of time. I didn't have a good measure of it, but then I was very quickly, oh wow, that was an incredible experience. That moment, that thought of, oh wow, that's so beautiful, pulled me back out of the experience so that I could analyze it, describe it, talk about my emotional reaction to it. And what that experience showed me is that my normal daily consciousness keeps me at a distance from the fabric of space and time that allows me to move through it. This is very normal. There's nothing wrong with it. That's an important thing. It's not to suggest that it's a flaw or failure. It's just that it's not all that's possible for the human mind to experience. But this is how we operate, moving through time and space as if we were completely independent objects. Now, the problem begins that separation doesn't end there. I'm moving in time and space, and you're moving in time and space. I'm me in this moment, and you're you in this moment, and I'm still me in the next moment, and you're still you in the next moment, and we are separate. From there, the human ego steps in and says, not only are we separate, but we're different. Here are the differences between us. Here's the difference between me and this object, between me and this person. It's wonderful to be able to describe things as they are, how our senses perceive them and perceive those differences. Then the ego goes even further. It says, some of those differences are good, and some of those differences are bad, and some of those differences I really like, and some of those differences I don't like. And then another layer. Some of those things that I don't like are problems or threats or matter less or have less value in the world. Right? We begin to move from separation to distinctions, to discrimination, to valuations. We start to put things in a hierarchy, all of which is unnecessary. Right? But this is how separation works for the human. Now, some part of us, this is what we talk about, the reptilian brain or the primal brain. We learned early on that there were threats to us because we operate in time and space, and there were tigers and other sorts of creatures and other humans that would in fact harm us. Well, then our primal brain is there for survival. And yet that primal brain tends to over-evaluate things that are threatening in today's world. So we're not talking about getting rid of it entirely, but we are talking about recognizing the ways in which our mind works. Our very essential primal brain served an essential function for our survival, and today we want to be able to distinguish time and space and not walk into traffic or step off the top of a building and things like that. So we want to honor and respect the function of our primal brain, and then to recognize how much it takes us further from what's necessary. Our normal brains, normal consciousness, not only distinguishes us, but also does so with a sense of hierarchy, discrimination, threats, not liking each other, and then sort of labeling everything good or bad and putting things in a hierarchy so that we're constantly in the realm of judgment. This is fundamentally what our minds are based on and what separation does. It's judgment. Describing good, bad, and a hierarchy of value that ultimately is saying whether something should or should not exist. So here's the other layer of oneness. Everything that I see and perceive is actually my consciousness. Right? I am not separate from it because the only thing that I'm interacting with really is my perception, how my senses take in that information and translate it to sight, touch, sound, etc. I'm actually only interacting with my perception of the world. I'm one with all of it because it is only my consciousness, my perception that filters this reality and allows me to perceive it in a particular way. And that's what I'm interacting with. And so is everybody else. And so when we're interacting, we're really interacting with mirrors. Right? I'm seeing my reflection of you, which is really my mind, and you're seeing your reflection of me, which is your mind. This is what everybody's doing. So the world that I'm interacting with is really me, my perception of it. Maybe two stories about how perception can change. The first story took place many years ago. Again, I was doing a lot of meditation, a lot of energy work, really deep spiritual work. I was in a hotel, and there was a moment when I was visiting a tailor to get measured for a suit. And I remember staring, and literally was standing there with my arms akimbo, tailor measuring me. And I was staring at the ground like this. And I was like, oh, I think it's drizzling outside. But I was like, wait, I'm staring at the floor. And I realized that I was seeing all of this wonderful little particles of light cascading. And I was like, whoa, what is that? And I began to see it all the time. And I still see it all the time. It's just the way the world looks to me now. And I've been to the ophthalmologist, and my eyes are normal. I spoke to a friend who's a medium, and he was like, oh yeah, you're definitely seeing new frequencies of light, new to me. And so that was a remarkable experience of shift of perspective of what is possible. And then a number of years later, I was in a deep meditation retreat, And I began to slow down. My mind really slowed down, which often happens when you do extended meditation retreats. And all of my senses began to take in more and more data. As I was slowing down, start to see more, hear more, the detail of what was coming into my senses was vastly more than I normally take in. Colors got really vibrant, sounds really intense, things that I didn't normally hear. And it was astonishing to me how much of that world I was able to take in by really slowing down and opening up those senses. These are just two examples of the way that our perception works to shape our experience of reality. So there's three definitions that we're working with right now. Oneness as our interdependence, oneness as our shared need for material support, food, water, air, and oneness as we're all actually one with the reality that we perceive. Our consciousness is really the only thing that we're interacting with. Up until now, I've been talking about oneness as a material experience, right? Interdependence, food, material goods, whether I perceive myself separately in time and space. The next definition of oneness has to do with the unseen world, the non-physical world, what I don't see through my normal five senses. And this is our oneness with what we might call God, the divine, source, spirit, the unseen world, the energetic world that is not necessarily taking physical form as we normally experience it. Those of you who've been on a spiritual path have had awakening experiences where you've had what might be called a mystical experience, some moment where you really experienced something different, whether it was connection with spirit, feeling your own sense of internal guidance, having an energetic experience, whatever it was where you felt, oh, I am actually connected, not just to the world, I'm not just completely one with the world, although I'm experiencing it as separate. I'm also one with, let's just call it the divine, with source, this energy, source of all life. And so when you have those experiences, that too disrupts your sense of who you are normally, from this autonomous being moving through the world, independent of everybody else. I've had many mystical experiences, but the experience that has most shaped my life is when I had a Kundalini awakening. The energy at the base of my spine is typically understood to be a coiled serpent energy that's dormant, woke up. This incredible explosion of energy at the base of my spine, and then it began to move up through the chakras. And there came a point when, in this experience, which happened for several months, about a month into it, I felt this energy coming in through my crown chakra, through the top of my head. It was like little droplets. It felt like rain droplets on my head, even though there's no physical rain. And I heard this incredibly beautiful and powerful voice that said, we're going to write, and we're going to write quickly. And that's when I began to channel, began to download these books about the nature of time and space, how human consciousness works. And the energetic experience was incredible. I would go into these deep blissful states. I'd channel for like 15, 20 minutes, and then I would be in a state that sometimes known as samadhi. It's a little bit different than the sort of peaceful samadhi that's often described in Buddhism. This is a sort of bliss, completely filled with light, could not speak. I would lose sense of time and space. Experience deeply connected me with an aspect of source. That's been my experience. Everybody has their inherent connection to the divine. You all have spirit guides, you have connection with people who have passed over, you have connections with non-material beings. Everybody has it. Now, that is not your normal experience of time and space. I get that. that is something that happens. For some people it happens once or twice, and then they go looking for it. Like it hasn't happened again. But having had it, you know that that's possible. Right? You know that that experience is available to the human mind. You are actually one with not only the physical realm, the non-physical realm, the energetic realm, the spiritual realm, the unmanifest. That connection can never be severed. It can be blocked, closed, suppressed, ignored, but it's never gone. You're alive in a human body. You are connected to God. And that connection is oneness. When you experience that, then you experience a kind of oneness, a sense of non-separation. You lose time and space in the same in a way that is a little bit different from interdependence or recognizing material needs, etc. It's not an experience that everyone is going to have. Again, that's no fault, that's not a failure. Just knowing that you are in fact connected. And you may be connecting through prayer, you may be connecting through creative visualization, you may be connecting through practices of devotion with images of the beings that represent God or the divine for you. All of that is honoring that oneness. And when you hear and listen to your intuition, where you're like, can't shake this feeling, or you get a message, you just know something, that is also a sign of your oneness. You're connecting with a higher consciousness, a higher self. And by higher, we're not in the realm of hierarchy, we just mean that experiences the world differently from the conventional consciousness that sees the world in terms of time and space, and I'm me and you're you, and we're completely different and separate from each other. How do we move out of the illusion of separation? I'm actually not a huge fan of the word illusion, precisely because it suggests that my perception of the world in terms of time and space is somehow false, and that there's this other true reality of oneness. And when I'm not experiencing that oneness, then I'm in some sort of false reality. If you've read any of my works, you know that I'm a huge proponent of paradox. I spend a lot of time in the realm of paradox. What I'm going to suggest to you is that there is a paradox, which is that we're both always and never separate from each other. Or, to put it differently, we're always and never in oneness. In other words, we both experience duality, and you may have an experience of oneness, and then you're going to come back into separation, and we're meant to. But how do you work with this movement between? And part of it is letting go of the idea that you need to be living in some sort of idealized state of oneness that you may have touched through a mystical experience, and that not living there is somehow then you experiencing time and space is not a failure. So that's the first step. Second, though, is to recognize the ways in which judgment filters into your experience of separation. Okay? Seeing people as threats, differences, that threat is another, that otherness shouldn't be there. Whenever you fall into judgment, which is to place a valuation on something that on some very deep level you're suggesting that shouldn't be, that shouldn't exist. I don't want that to be part of my reality. That's when you've fallen back into separation. Similarly, when you are moving through the world and not really aware or even taking a moment to be grateful for your interdependence, that all of the support that you've received through food, teaching, being raised, all of the many people who've contributed to your life. That's an important moment to step back. Oh, I'm falling into this sense of myself as this isolated being, despite all of our many differences. And those differences not necessarily being threatening, not necessarily being a sign of good and bad, simply differences that reflect the incredible, infinite possibility of what it means to be human. So I can be oriented in time and space, just as you're oriented in time and space, and I can see that there are differences, and I can celebrate those differences, and that within that, there is a shared sameness of material need, sameness of interdependence, sameness that we're all seeing the world through our consciousness, through our perception. And that when two people are in conflict, you're actually in conflict with your perceptions of each other. That can go a long way to reminding you that most of those differences, most of your opinions or judgments about other people are not an actual reflection of reality. There's also a tendency of the ego to hijack this notion of perception, which is say, I'm God and everything else in it is just my construct, right? You and everybody else. You are somebody else's construct. They are perceiving you and you're perceiving them. And this is co-creation. We co-create each other. Consciousnesses coming together. And so you don't want to install yourself as the center. You don't control it all. This notion of oneness should not install a sense of superiority. Quite to the contrary, it should install a sense of humility, an expansiveness, an interconnectedness that doesn't come with a sense of aggrandizement. I want to give you a couple metaphors or analogies to hold on to. One, which is fairly common, is the notion that we're all raindrops coming back into the ocean. Right? We're all part of the same. We experience a form of separation, but we're not really different from each other. And then we come back into this oneness of the ocean. Another example would be being different cells in a body. We're all part of the same organism. We may have different functions, we may have different purposes, but we are all working and interdependent on each other for this organism to function. It's like if I were a red blood cell and you were a white blood cell and somebody else was part of this other system, a nerve, a synapse. We all have maybe different functions, different roles, but we all need each other. We're all part of the same being. What are the practices for working with the illusion so that you don't fall into judgment, so that you can at least come closer to oneness in your daily experience? Meditation is the number one experience for getting to know your own mind, the number one practice for knowing how your consciousness works and seeing the judgments that come, seeing how your mind judges. And one of the primary things is not that you have to have mystical experiences where there's no sense of separation whatsoever, that you feel that oneness, but rather experiencing separation. I'm me and you're you, and I'm still me and you're still you in the next moment. And you're in one time and space and I'm in another time and space. And that's it. Whatever other differences, I can note them. At the moment, I notice hierarchies of value, valuations, discriminating and evaluating. Then I might want to take a look at that. Meditation will help you to see that. Another really beautiful practice is loving kindness, or metta, where you practice giving wishes to somebody that you love dearly, somebody that you don't really know at all, a neutral person, somebody that's difficult, and of course to yourself. And noticing how your mind reacts differently to that. Noticing where there's judgment, right? Even in choosing somebody that you consider neutral, a difficult person, etc. You're already playing with the hierarchies and offering them the same. There is no difference in your capacity to give them positive wishes. And the third primary practice that is all about erasing hierarchy and judgment is forgiveness. Forgiveness is a complicated topic. I'm not going to be able to go into it in depth today. Just know that forgiveness is the practice of unwinding a judgment where you allocated blame and you allocated some sense of victim and abuser or perpetrator in a way that keeps you locked into a dynamic of separation. And that forgiveness includes yourself, forgiving yourself for judgments you've made, for mistakes you've made, for regrets, any moment where you've fallen into judgment of yourself. And so the practice is working with your own perceptions. Every time you experience a sense of judgment, acknowledging where does it come from? Why am I making this judgment? Everything you're seeing is your perception. So if you perceive threats, if you perceive difference, and then you judge that, those judgments are you, based on what data you're taking in. That's your construct of consciousness. You were formed, brought up in this world, and now your task is to unwind that. And this is especially important when we meet people who don't share the same perspective on separation and oneness, who really believe in separation and really believe in their judgments and really believe in their differences. And you can say, they need to wake up. They need to get on a spiritual path. No, you were once that person too. All of us at one point or another existed before waking up, before beginning to see the world differently. And so we need to honor that that's where they are. And if that triggers us, well, then we're back to working with our perception of them. We've covered various definitions of oneness, what separation is, and why it's important to begin to work with our judgment, to unravel them. And when we begin to experience that, we realize that we have so much more power. There's power here in recognizing that we are creating the world. When we experience oneness, we experience our heart opening, we experience a sense of humility, we experience the need to honor all of these other beings who've contributed to our lives because we're not separate from them. We have a lot more compassion for people who don't see the world in the same way. We have a lot of compassion for them because we know that it's really hard to experience the world in the way that we normally do, time and space and being separate from each other. And when you have this experience of oneness, both intellectual understanding and sinking into your heart, there's a real sense of connection. There's a sense of connection, a sense of compassion, because everything that you're seeing is you. And you are part of everyone else's perceptions. There's something very both humbling and expansive at the same time when we experience oneness. I hope you found today's video enlightening, illuminating, inspiring in some way. If you do, this is just the beginning. Please subscribe to my channel, and I'll look forward to talking to you next time.